Now, those of you on the mailing list may have an inkling why I'm choosing to talk about seasons in haiku. But even if you're not on the mailing list, I hope you'll enjoy the poetry I have for you today. As today, inspired by the weather in Zurich, which I'm pleased to say is warming up, I'll read you some spring and summer haiku. Hello, welcome to the Poetry Pea cast. I'm Patricia, your host for today's poetry. But before we get cracking, just a reminder to those of you on the mailing list, do check your emails. I'm sending you an invitation for something a little bit special. Together, you and I have studied the origins of haiku. So when we look at why the season is important in these little verses, there's probably no reason to talk through the historical context. But it is worth reminding ourselves of a few things. Way back when haiku became more than a thought, poets were much closer to nature than most of us are today. As R.H. Blythe reminds us, the season was never absent from the mind of the poet. Seasons had a practical meaning for these first two haiku poets. For example, they had to layer up when it was winter, in terms of clothing, that is. They didn't have the joy of just turning up the thermostat on the heating, as I might. Ripe tomatoes were a thing only of summer, not available year-round in the shiny supermarkets we have today. Their tomatoes had a much smaller footprint, although I have to say, mine are coming on nicely in the garden. And that closeness to nature meant that poets could utilize the season more effectively to express feelings and emotions. And most of their readers would understand there was like a symbolic meaning to these seasons, much more so than we have today, probably. But let's not forget that haiku was not the global phenomenon it is today either. So, they had a bit of a head start, really, because most of the poetry being written were for readers who were living in the same global region. And just a little memo to self. A haiku should make you feel something. And to quote from Lee Gerger's book, Haiku, A Poet's Guide, season is the soul of haiku. Of course, some of you might not agree with that. I'm sure you'll let me know by email, but I sort of feel that way too. So how do we in the modern world, in which we write for a global audience, use the seasonal reference to make people feel emotion? Well, I suppose we do have the Japanese Sajiki to consult, and they suggest phrases we can use to symbolize the season. For example, in the 500 Essential Japanese Season Words, edited by Kenchiki Yamamoto, we can use still cold for early spring, cormorant fishing for the whole of summer, dragonfly for all of the autumn period, and frost for the whole of winter. Although, to be clear about frost, it can mean other seasons when used in slightly different phrasing. So, for example, last frost is late spring. But these seasonal words can be problematical in the English language haiku. Because, as I said before, our haiku are written across the globe, and although we share a language, we're not sharing climates or seasons necessarily. And again, as I've alluded to, many of us live in urban settings, and we see our seasons at arm's length. They don't impinge on our lives as they would have done even in the last century. Speaking personally, many of the Kigo or seasonal words from the Sajiki will mean little or nothing to me. Cormorant fishing, for example. If used by modern poets in a modern poem, it might signify a little bit of cruelty for me. And yet, it might have a different meaning in a different part of the world today, or used way back when. And taking that a little bit further, We Western poets don't universally understand the meaning of these seasonal references as a Japanese person might do. At least, coming clean, I don't. And I'll give you an example. Hiding in the water, the grebes of Lake Biwa at year's end. Hiding in the water, the grebes of Lake Biwa at year's end. And that's one of Basho's, translated by Shirane. And he tells us the depth of this poem, which I think probably I would have been unaware of had I just read it and moved on. Now, the year's end is a period of time in which people in Basho's time would be busy doing things like settling their finances. And the fact that the observer in this poem has time to be watching the grebes suggests this person lives such a life that they're not busy at this time of year. Who knew? Perhaps you did, but I had to be told. Anyway, given the problems that I've highlighted, why would we continue to use seasonal references in our haiku? And I know many people don't, but as I said, I think we should still. Despite the seasons not being universal, there are certain seasonal experiences that transcend the differences in the places we live. The idea of snow, for example, or the blossom of fruit trees, and fog certainly has an emotional pull for me. I can see exactly why it's perfect to refer to autumn. Even though in my locale, living close by a lake, fog and mist are part of autumn, spring, and actually summer, because I saw some the other day, and winter for me. And perhaps you can think of other seasonal references that have universal appeal. Higginson supposes that the use of seasonal reference means that the readers are much more likely to grasp what the poet wants to share. It's also true that the use of a seasonal word can carry an abundance of information. And of course, we're limited in the number of words we use, so that can be quite useful. The successful use of a seasonal reference expands the scope of haiku, offering associations that can be understood regardless of the geography of the reader, and can highlight an unusual aspect of the season and enrich our experience or understanding of it. I don't know about you, but sometimes I face the problem of knowing just how to get the season into my poem. Certainly when I was less experienced, I just add a fragment like autumn skies or summer equinox, which are fine in themselves and do sometimes work when they have an emotional resonance with the poem. But without this resonance, the fragment is meaningless. There should be some connection between the fragment and the phrase that engenders some emotion in the reader. A word of caution, though. When I'm reading a poem, I don't want to feel that my emotions have been manipulated, and I suspect it's the same for most of you. We can also use seasonal references as an allusion. Let me give you an example. Autumn evening, the crow begins its call with a deep bow. Autumn evening, the crow begins its call with a deep bow. And that's by Jeannie Embridge in the 55th Basho Festival Anthology from 2001. And it alludes to this poem. On a withered branch, a crow is perched, an autumn evening. On a withered branch, a crow is perched, an autumn evening. By Basho himself. I'm not sure of the translation. Sorry about that. And maybe you can think of other allusions, but that's the one that sprung to mind with me. So let's talk about how we go about using our seasonal references. You can make an obvious mention of the season. After Christmas, a flock of sparrows in the unsold Christmas trees. After Christmas, a flock of sparrows in the unsold Christmas trees. That's by D. Evetts, and I found that in Lee Gerger's Haiku, A Poet's Guide. You can offer your reader a clue to the season. And I'll give you this one, which I haven't had published because I haven't really worked on it yet. This is first draft. Valley floor cows eat the last fresh grass. Valley floor, cows eat the last fresh grass. Now you might wonder, where's the clue in that? But you probably need to know, and most of you do, that I live in Switzerland and that the cows eating grass in a field on the valley floor suggests that they've come down from the mountains, and if that weren't enough, as it's the last fresh grass, winter is coming, and soon they're going to be kept in their barns, eating the summer's harvested hay. Now, each season has a different energy, and Janice Doppler covered this in our discussions on Zoka, which, if you haven't listened to, I'd encourage you to go back and have a listen or read through the show notes. The information, of course, on where to find all these bits and pieces will be in our own show notes. But when I think of seasons, I define them like this. Spring for me is all about renewal and hope. And here's a poem by Janice herself from Presents. An egg mass in sunlit shallows, the tadpole wriggles free. An egg mass in sunlit shadows, the tadpole wriggles free. Summer is all about growth and flowering and blossoming and just joie de vivre. Wild strawberries, the skim and dart of white butterflies. Wild strawberries, the skim and dart of white butterflies. And that's by Joe Balistreri from Heron's Nest in 2023. We're going to talk about autumn and winter next time, but just in passing, autumn suggests to me the end of days approaching, life slowing down. There's sort of a little bit of melancholy about it, isn't there? And here's a poem from Sangeeta Kalarikal from our own Poetry Pea journal. Twilight, a dahlia wilts into deeper shades. Twilight, a dahlia wilts into deeper shades. I don't know about you, but dahlias, although they flower in summer, are sort of an autumny flower for me. They flower well into the autumn. That's if the slugs haven't got them, which they've got mine this year. C'est la vie. And winter. Well, winter for me is about quiet, recuperation, and maybe total decline. Here's one of mine from Firefly's Light from April of this year. One last tango before it's too late. Invierno. One last tango before it's too late. Invierno. So I'm wondering now, how do my thoughts on season compare with yours? Let me know. Now, having given you something of the background, something to mull over, I'd like to read you some examples of haiku, which I hope will resonate with you and illustrate the use of Kigo for spring and summer. Here we go. Let's talk spring. Middling Friday, he hands me a crucifix made of straw. Middling Friday, he hands me a crucifix made of straw. Mark Gilbert. From Presents. March this year. No map, no GPS, just a breeze and a self-driving butterfly. No map, no GPS, just a breeze and a self-driving butterfly. Catherine Bold. Bottle Rockets, 2022, issue 47. Holding the sky together, cherry blossoms. Holding the sky together, cherry blossoms. Lucia Fontana. From Presents, issue 78, March 2024. And can you see what I mean about that fragment, cherry blossoms? So many people just use that as the fragment, but it really fits in here and makes total sense. And I don't know about you, but it gives me another viewpoint of the season. Spring cleaning, a fishtail flung from the nest. Spring cleaning, a fishtail flung from the nest. Bill Cooper. From Bird Whistle, Bottle Rockets Press, 2023. Spring thaw, a bit of hide still on the bone. Spring thaw, a bit of hide still on the bone. Brian Rickett. And that's from Presents, issue 78. Clocks forward, his long johns on the line. Clocks forward, his long johns on the line. Karen Robbie. Presents, issue 78. A light knock on your door, spring rain. A light knock on your door, spring rain. Suraj Nanu. From Blithe Spirit, volume 34.1, 2024. Now, let's head into summer, just as I'm doing here in Zurich. Orange by orange, out of the tree, the soft whoomp of children. Orange by orange, out of the tree, the soft whoomp of children. J. Zimmerman. From Upside Down, Red Moon's Anthology 2024. Almost autumn. Deep in the cornfield, a deer lifts its head. Almost autumn. Deep in the cornfield, a deer lifts its head. Paul Chambers, Presents, issue 78. And you can see, in using almost autumn and mentioning another season, he has actually brought us back to the end of summer. Each carriage horse resting one leg, summer afternoon. Each carriage horse resting one leg, summer afternoon. A.C. Missias. And that's from Modern Haiku 33.2 in 2002. Water's edge, a sun-baked footprint harbours a feather. Water's edge, a sun-baked footprint harbours a feather. By Debbie Olson. Frog Pond, 42.2, 2024. Returning from the edge of the world, Dad and his mower. Returning from the edge of the world, Dad and his mower. Barry Levine. From Upside Down, the Red Moon Anthology, 2024. Mating finches. The rush of summer ending. Mating finches. The rush of summer ending. Vladislav Hristov. Presents, issue 78. Garden Buddha. The dead nettle. Back again. Garden Buddha. The dead nettle. Back again. Lorraine A. Padden. Another one from Presents, issue 78. Well now, I hope you've enjoyed spring and summer with me. Next week, we're heading off to autumn and winter with poems just for you. And in the meantime, if you can find the price of a Zurich coffee to support the podcast and help me save up to have someone design and implement a new website for us, or perhaps you can sponsor Poetry Pea with a membership, which of course has benefits for you too, I'd be very grateful. It will help so much. Speaking of things that will help, if you can leave us a review and tell your friends about us too, that would be fantastic. Now, if you're not a member, you can read these poems on the presentation on the Poetry Pea YouTube channel. But if you're a Buson or ISA member, they'll be sent to you in an email. So until next time, thank you so much for joining me today, and I hope to see you next time for a little bit of autumn and winter. But until then, keep writing. Links to all the bits and pieces will be in the show notes. If you have any questions, just email me. Ciao.